Namaste and welcome, friends, to tonight's live webinar of Living Wisely, Living Well. And before we begin this evening's discourse, I'd like to begin with a chant. Just so if you close your eyes, and those of you who know this chant, if you can sing it along with me in your homes as you're watching this. Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do seek. Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do seek. In the thought by my love brought, in the thought by my love brought, I taste thy name, so sweet, so sweet. Devotee knows how sweet you are. Devotee knows how sweet you are. He knows whom you let know. He knows whom you let know. Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do seek. Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do seek. In the thought by my love brought, in the thought by my love brought, I taste thy name, so sweet, so sweet. Devotee knows how sweet you are. Devotee knows how sweet you are. He knows whom you let know. He knows whom you let know. He knows whom you let know. Om, Om, Om. Divine Mother, bless this webinar this evening with thy presence. So as you know, every week we take a reading from Living Wisely, Living Well by Swami Kriyananda. And these are daily readings, 365 for the year of inspiration, very practical in their nature. And so let's take today's reading. It's from November 14th. Before making an important decision in life, enter into your inner temple of silence, and there consult your higher self. If your mind is focused, you may get your answer in an instant. Direct your question to God through the spiritual eye in your forehead. The answer will then appear in your heart as a deep, calm intuition. If you are not yet sure, ask, is this the right decision? If not, what ought I to do? The correctness of the answer will depend on how one pointedly you focus your energy. Some people take months to reach a conclusion they might have reached in a moment if they'd concentrated deeply. Often, they reach wrong conclusions anyway, simply because they expected their answer to be reasonable. Coincidentally, just a few days ago, Swamis Jyotish and Devi gave a discourse here in Pune City, and it was on the topic of how to make right decisions in life. And you can access this video by going onto the internet and going to YouTube and typing in Ananda Online channel. And you'll find it under that title of How to Make Right Decisions in Life. And they cover this topic of making decisions properly and quite extensively. So I don't wish to reiterate everything they said, and I probably couldn't in the short time that I have, but I would like to mention a few points, and particularly those that relate to this. One of the sentences that Swami writes in this week's reading. One of the points that Jyotish Devi made is that if we're going to make a right decision in life, we have to ask ourselves, what is the direction that we're going? A decision toward what goal? And I think for us as devotees, we make decisions in life to take us perhaps sometimes in many different goals. They might be just very practical things in our day-to-day life, but those things that are really important, probably we're asking ourselves, what is the right thing to do? I want to do the right thing. What is it that I should do? And you could say that for the devotee, the goal of all of our lives, and in a sense, the goal of all of our actions is, what are those things that are going to take us towards soul freedom? And you could say very simply, when somebody asks the question, well, what's right? What's wrong? What's the right direction to go, wrong direction to go in everything you do? If you take it back to an introspection of what is this decision, in what direction is it going to take me? Is it going to take me closer to soul freedom? Or is it going to take me into greater bondage, into the ego, into day-to-day affairs associated with this body and this personality and its attachments? And if we can use our inner perception to be able to distinguish between those two, and I understand, and I warn you that it's a subtle distinction that we have to make between those. But if we can learn to understand what is it that we really want, that soul freedom, and what are those things in life that will take us in that direction ultimately, and if we always incline our decision making in that direction, you might say err on the side of going in that direction, that generally we're going to err more on the side of correct, proper decision making rather than those things that take us into greater bondage. And so this, in having our goal in mind and correct and understanding what it is that we really want, it helps us to make those decisions in life that are come to us every day. You might say there are some decisions that we have to make, and we look inside and we say, yes, this is the direction I want to go. But it's not an easy thing to do. And if we introspect, as Swami Kriyananda here, is go inside, pray, ask God, and then look into and feel in the heart intuitively what that divine answer is. It's not so clear. It's should I do this? Should I do that? And how can we determine which is which? Going in the right direction or going in those things that's going to lead us ultimately to greater bondage and suffering? Well, the first requisite, or one of the very most important requisites, is to be completely impartial in the sense of taking out of the equation our personal biases and likes and dislikes. And this is a difficult thing to do because we have to be honest with ourselves and realize that we do have biases one way or the other. But this, in a sense, is what the purpose is of when we learn to meditate day after day, month after month, year after year. We come to the point where we begin to withdraw ourselves from those day-to-day biases and be able to see ourselves objectively. Oftentimes, think of the advice that you give to a friend. When you're advising a friend who has come to you and asked for advice, should I do this, should I do that, you tend to be able to give very somewhat unbiased opinions about what that friend should do, because that friend isn't you, the one that's going to have to do those actions. And you're removed from it. And if we can learn to come to that point in our own inner life, in our own inner sense of looking at ourselves, that we are our own highest friend. We're the greatest friend that we have, that higher self advising us in our day-to-day actions what you should do, what's the right thing in the long run for you to do. But this takes this degree of unbiasedness, which comes through the daily practice of meditation. And you get to that point when you can step aside and be honest with yourself and give yourself that good advice. But there's one line particularly in today's reading that I wanted to focus on a little bit more. And I advise you toward watching that video that I referenced for more in-depth on this topic of how to make the right decisions in life. But the line that struck me is the very last one. It says people sometimes take months to come to a decision that they could have come to quite quickly if they had deeper concentration. But then he ends this by saying, often they reach wrong conclusions anyway, no matter how much they've been concentrating and pondering on it. Well, I think we could probably all relate to that as well. But then he says, simply because they expected their answer to be reasonable. Now, I read that and I thought, that's an interesting thing to say. We expect our answer to be reasonable. And my first reaction when I read that, well, shouldn't they be reasonable? I'm asking God for a direction in life. And can I not at least expect God to give me an answer that's reasonable, as opposed to something that's unreasonable or something that's incomprehensible? But yet, think about this. If we expect a reasonable answer, what Swamiji is saying, oftentimes what we're doing is we're limiting ourselves. We're expecting those answers to come to us in a box of reason that is comprehensible to us. And that box is limited by our own expectations of what is reasonable. In other words, we have a sense of what is reasonable, and some people have a very narrow perspective of what that is because their reason is very limited. And reason itself is not able to be perceptive of the highest truths all by itself. And so one person has a very limited sense of reason, another one has a little bit broader sense. And so those boxes come in all different sizes and shapes, but nevertheless, they're all boxes. And so if we expect God to give us something that's within our reason alone, we are eliminating the possibility that God is going to speak beyond our reason into the infinity of possible answers that could be the right answer for us, and not, what Swami is saying, lock ourselves in to our limited sense of what is and what is not reasonable. Now, I don't mean by saying this, I don't mean the sense that we should expect unreasonable answers or totally non-commonsensical answers. But let's not limit ourselves, because God whispers to us in ways that often, and maybe even more often than not, are not immediately comprehensible, that we have to meditate upon, and we have to bring in the element of feeling into it. God answers, as Swami was saying, we broadcast our question and our prayer for guidance. We broadcast it from the spiritual eye. And then he says that in the broadcasting of that, afterwards, we listen in the calmness of the heart. Now, the heart is where we feel. And so answers come more in the realm of feeling. Yes, that feels right. Or no, that doesn't feel right. Now, this is where we must have calm feeling. We must have eliminated those likes and dislikes to the degree that we can. And in that calm stillness of the heart, we then can begin to feel the right direction. And that feeling wells up and then begins to guide us in this direction or that. And so then that may not immediately make sense to us. But if we go by that intuitive feeling, that clear feeling, clear intuition, inspired feeling is what Swami Kriyananda defines intuition. It's an inspired feeling, not a like and dislike of our own biases. And then follow that inspired feeling. And then in time, maybe it does make sense. Now, it's not to say that an answer may not come with a reasonable, that's it, I know it, and now it all clicks. But don't limit ourselves to that, because there's a much larger a perspective needs to be brought upon this. There's a wonderful story that I remember from Swami Kriyananda's life. He told that shows a little bit of the balance and perhaps an approach that we might want to take when we're praying for guidance, because reason and common sense is something that Master Paramahansa Yogananda used to say, yes, you have to have common sense. It's important to have common sense. And somebody was referencing just recently that Anandamoy Ma said common sense was more important than devotion even, because common devotion can be learned and cultivated and grow within us, but devotion is, devotion can, but common sense seems like you either have it or you don't. And now I don't know if she really said that, but it does make some sense. Now the story goes that Swamiji years ago, and I was living at Ananda Village at the time when this happened with Swami, is that he had in the early years, and this would have been in the early 1970s, he had a car. And he's written about this in his book, The New Path. And he had it was a car, it was a used car, and it had many miles on it. And he was thinking that, well, maybe the time is going to come, he needs to buy a new car. But at the same time, he had in his meditations, he had an inspiration that it was time for him to go and visit India. Once again, it had been many years since he had been in India. And he was inspired, and he had been able to receive a visa which had been previously denied to him for many years. He was granted a visa to go and visit India. And so he said, yes, that feels right. God's calling me to go to India at that time. And so he made preparations to buy his ticket, and everything was in place for him to go. But as he was driving to San Francisco, not long before his trip was about to begin, his car, which had many miles on it, its engine basically failed on him. And it was a very serious engine failure. And it completely broke down. Now, he thought, oh, no. He went to the car dealership, and the mechanic told him, no, it needs major repair work. So Swami was in a dilemma. Should he spend the limited amount of money he had at that time, which was just enough to get him to India and do his visit and come back? But if he was to spend that money on that trip, when he got back, he would have no car, and he had no additional money at that time. And because he lived in Ananda Village, which is in ashram in the mountains, he very much needed a car for the work that he was doing. So he thought about it, and it seemed that common sense to him dictated that, no, I absolutely need a car when I come back. And I'm not exactly sure I need to go to India. I feel guided to do that, but I do need the car. And so his common sense told him to buy another used car. So he did. He spent about a little over $1,000, and he bought a used car, a good, decent one. And so he prayed to Divine Mother. He said, Divine Mother, I've prayed to you, and I feel guided to go to India. I feel your guidance to do that, but the car is broke, and my common sense tells me in order to serve you, I need to have this car. And so I'm going to buy the car. But if you still want me to go to India, you're going to have to help me and show me what the right thing to do is. And so he left it at that, bought the car, and went home. Well, a few days later, not too long before he was scheduled to actually go to India, according to his original plan, he received in the mail from a person who he did not know. This was a stranger, and it was in the envelope. There was a check with a very simple note, and the check was for $1,000. And the note said, use this money as Divine Mother wishes, as you think Divine Mother would have you use it. Now, and that was it. There was no explanation beyond that. And Swami took that, of course. I suspect you would too, took that as a sign that yes, this was the money to cover the cost of the car or help cover the cost of his trip to India. And he made mention at that time, he says, it was so amazing because how many people get a letter like that saying, Divine Mother, use this money as Divine Mother wishes, completely out of the blue from somebody they do not know. So he took it as a sign and he went on that journey. But this was a good example I've always felt, because here he was stuck between, do I do something that my intuition says to go in this direction, but my common sense also balanced against that says to go in the other. Well, what he did is he prayed very deeply to Divine Mother. He followed his common sense, but then he said, Mother, guide me in this. And if you think that something else is to be done, please give me that sign and some further guidance and able to pursue that. And so he was open to something more. And I think this is why we cannot rely simply on reasonableness. We have to be open to the potential that God will speak to us in many different ways, even sometimes it doesn't make sense. Now, haven't you, as have I at times, made a choice? I don't know, I'm going to do this. I don't know if it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. Perhaps I should rephrase that. I don't know if it's the best or highest thing to do. It's not a wrong thing to do, but it's not the highest thing to do. Should I do that? Although it doesn't really make sense, but I feel it in my heart that this is something that is good and in a good direction and it will succeed. And I've gone in that direction. And I have to admit, sometimes I'm not completely sure I made the right decision in the long run, but nevertheless, you can feel it in your heart, and you find oftentimes that you take the steps and somehow you're supported in that. And it turns out, okay, that you did make the right decision, even though at the time it didn't completely make sense. It made some sense, but it was not completely against common sense, but it wasn't completely sure either in the mind. Well, this is, I think when you do this, you begin to open up that channel for the intuition. Paramahansa Yogananda said, we should have the faith to take one step beyond our experience. To take two steps beyond your experience might be considered presumption, but our faith grows in guidance, in Divine Mother's guidance, God's guidance, if we go a little bit beyond what our experience is. And for that word experience, you can substitute reasonableness. Sometimes go a little bit beyond and push that envelope a little bit further and see. To go too far, of course, is perhaps being presumptuous. There was a story that Paramahansa Yogananda heard that one of his disciples, a lady, was driving very recklessly in her car. And when she was admonished by some other disciples, you shouldn't be so reckless, she said, Master will guide me, Master will protect me. And when Yoganandaji heard that, he says, oh, see if she can drive off a cliff and see if I'm going to save her. And that it's been presumptuous just to say, well, Master, I'm going to do foolish things. Master's going to protect me. Well, I guess Master does protect foolish people, but not when they take it to the level of presumption that I can do what I will and Master's going to pick up the pieces. We have to use our intelligence. We have to use our reasonableness, but yet we want to grow it, to expand it so that it is able to, in that way, deepen and be able to expand, to be able to guide us even further. And so in this way, have faith that God is there. Now, in order to have that faith and in order to receive that guidance, we need to develop that connection that we have. We cannot simply pray to God when something big comes up in our life. If we initiate a habit of speaking to God, asking for God's guidance, even in the smallest things in life, have that conversation going on in our mind. God, guide me, guide me. What would you have me do, Divine Mother? What would you like of me? I am your hands. These are your hands. These are your feet. This is your body. Guide me in what I should do. I'm, you might say, the instrument for making them work, but I need your guidance. This doesn't belong to me. And if we ask that in the smallest things, then we find that in the larger things, God's guidance begins to take over, and our intuition begins to guide us. That feeling in the heart begins to clarify. In the calm heart, let me say, it begins to clarify. And if we keep that heart very calm and we begin to push that border out a little bit beyond what we think is reasonable right now, we'll find that miracles can happen. It's not that we make them happen, but we are an instrument to allow miracles to happen through us. It's God that does everything in this world. It's God that does everything through us and within us, if we could only but realize that and cooperate with that divine energy flowing through us. Remember Yogananda's highest prayer. He said, I will reason, I will, I will act, but guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the highest course in everything I do. But in order for us to be able to act in that highest course, we need to always be receptive to that guidance, using our concentration to broadcast our prayer and the calm feeling of a still heart to receive it. And all the time, whether broadcasting or receiving, we're in conversation with Divine Mother and her grace, and feeling that with our highest desires to do that which pleases her, and in doing those actions which take us in the direction of our own soul freedom. Joy to you this evening.